Welcome to the Pocket. I'm your host, Scooter, and here for you guys today. We have the second edition of one move every team should make this offseason. We're going division by division. First, we did the NFC East. Go check it out. Up next, we got my second favorite division. That would be the AFC North. So much history between all these teams, so much bad blood. These games always get nasty. It's cold, it's messy. You gotta love it if you're a football fan. So that's why they're my second favorite division. But it's also a very interesting division too. You got the Ravens. They finished first place this year at 12-5. Steelers 10-7. The Bengals 9-8, and the Browns 3-14 in last place. The Bengals lost a lot of really close one-score games, and they could have replaced the Steelers in the playoffs as that sixth seed, but or even the Broncos as a 7 seed if they had just won one of those games. But unfortunately for them, they did not. So they had an unfortunate end to their season. But here's how we're going to go over this today. I'm going to give you what I think each team's biggest need is, what they should prioritize this offseason. I'm going to give you kind of two honorable mentions for other positions. Maybe I will assume they fill them some way. I'll tell you why I feel like the one need I point out is the biggest. And then I'll tell you exactly how I would address it if I was the GM. So let's get right into it. So as I mentioned before, this was the standings. Ravens first place, Steelers second, Bengals third, and Browns last place. If we go over here to the draft board, you can see the Browns actually have the second pick in the draft. So they've got a lot of resources draft-wise, but you got to go all the way down to 17 to find the Bengals finishing 9-8. Man, those couple wins they made down the stretch really costed them in draft position. They won 5 straight. Just imagine if they just sold the season and finished with like 4 wins and had a top 5 pick. That would be crazy. But here they are at 17. You find the Steelers at number 21, not too far away. And then you got the Ravens at 27, furthest down the board. Obviously, they went to the playoffs, lost to the Bills in the divisional round. Very tough loss for them, but they were oh so close. And you saw how close the Bills were to the Chiefs and how close the Ravens played the Eagles earlier in the year. And you could say we are right there. So, first, we're going to talk about the Ravens. Their biggest needs would be offensive tackle, depending on whether or not they bring back Ronnie Stanley, wide receiver, a number one edge rusher, offensive guard, depending on whether or not they bring back Patrick McCarry, and then safety depth. So the way I see this is they should definitely try to retain Ronnie Stanley and Patrick McCarry. They successfully replaced 3 offensive linemen last year, but it wasn't a success for a couple weeks, right? So they kind of got away with it, if you ask me. I know they're very good at developing these younger players that they take, and they have their system or whatever. But I just think you don't want to get too cute and test the waters with that and see how long you can get away with it. You are so close as a team that I would recommend bringing back as many of the players that you have the option to re-sign as you can, especially on the offensive line. Now, Ronnie Stanley does have injury concerns. He is older and up there in age, but if you are concerned about that, you can bring him back and draft a high upside raw prospect like they've been doing years and years and years, and you'll at least be prepared for the future, or maybe he can fill in and do something if Stanley gets hurt this year. So that's where I think they should do there. So tackle and guard, not a need. We're down to wide receiver, edge, and safety. I don't think safety should be in here. Go ask Kyle Hamilton what he thinks about the Ravens. He thinks we basically have no holes. Well, I'm going to disagree. I do think they could use a number one edge rusher, but I think their biggest need is number one wide receiver. I said it after they lost to the Bills game. I said I felt like if they just had a number one wide receiver, like a guy out there who could have been reliable, that they definitely would have won that game. They didn't have Zay Flowers. Pretty sure Bateman got hurt in that game, and he was playing pretty well. So Lamar was down to, who is it, Tylan Wallace as his like number one wide receiver. That's no good. You can't. I don't even think Patrick Mahomes could make that work, and we've actually seen the result of even a guy like him struggling without weapons. So I understand Lamar has Henry. He's got a good offensive line. They've got a good set of 3 tight ends, Andrews, Likely, and Charlie Kolar, but no number one wide receiver. Now, you might say Zay is, but I would say he's really a lot more of a good slot. He's very explosive after the catch, but I just don't think he's consistent enough to be considered like the true alpha that they need. Bateman, decent perimeter guy, maybe a number 2 on his best day, but most likely a number 3. I'd view Zay as like the number 2 in this situation, meaning we are looking for that number 1 wide receiver. So even though they've never relied on an alpha wide receiver, and their offense does function differently than most. Maybe that's the issue. It does kind of feel like to me that Lamar and Henry are so great, and there's a lot of explosive plays that they make, but it's not good for the 2 minute drill to rely on explosive plays. You got to dink and dunk your way down the field methodically, getting guys out of bounds. Very, very precise. Of course, Lamar's scramble game is very, very good for that, but that is very volatile. You don't know. He could scramble and get sacked, and boom, that's the end of the drive. You really would much rather depend on someone who can drop back, make a quick pass, live to see another down. So, adding a number one alpha wide receiver would open up every facet of this offense. I think it would completely change everything. And they're in a Super Bowl window right now. They're in perfect position to not only draft a number one wide receiver, but I say trade up. You're all the way down here at number 27. But if you look at all of these teams that are ahead of them, the Texans, the Packers, the Chargers, the Steelers, the Broncos, and who knows who could move up here and try to get their guy. There's a decent amount of wide receivers, but there's only four projected to go in the first round, according to PFF. But if you really like some guy, you wouldn't have to trade up to get him. I think it's these top three guys that they should be targeting. Matthew Golden had an incredible combine, but I think he's too similar to Zay Flowers. You really need a guy like one of these two, but I'm going to say they should target Luther Burden. Here's the reason why. Luther Burden is 6 foot, 206. His hands might be a little bit small, and his athleticism score isn't crazy, but he did run a 4.4 and had a decent 10-yard split. But here's what he comps to: 6 foot, 206. Look at this. Brandon Ayuk, 6 foot, 200 pounds. He's known as a number one alpha wide receiver, a separator, but a guy who's also big enough to box out defenders if he doesn't quite create enough separation so he can beat small corners. He can run away from big corners. Look at Malik Neighbors, 6 foot, 200 pounds. Obviously, I would say he's probably more athletic than Luther Burden, maybe even faster and stronger, but you see even bigger hands. Wow. Malik Neighbors is a great prospect. So glad the Giants got him. Go Leak. But anyway, yeah, he comps to these alpha wide receivers, these number one guys who can do everything. DJ Moore, a little bit bigger at 210, but 6 foot. You see the similarities here. And these guys all play that number one alpha wide receiver role, where you can still do what you do with a guy like Zay Flowers and just get the ball in his hands, but you can also have him run dig routes, right? Which is great for play action, which the Ravens love. And I guess they've had Bateman doing that. They've tried it with Zay Flowers before, but it doesn't really stand out to me. It's not quite the same. He might be fast and elusive after the catch, but he's not going to like break a tackle and run away like an AJ Brown, a DJ Moore, or a Malik Neighbors would. So I think they should trade up for Luther Burden. As you can see, I have a bit of a mock draft going here. No, this is not official, but just look at what is left here for the Ravens. Like I said, all four of those guys in the first round went ahead of them. So they would have to trade up with, I would say, probably the Seahawks, maybe the Buccaneers. I don't think the Bengals would be too willing to, but maybe the Cardinals. You can even jump ahead of them if they decide not to sign T. Higgins. They might go ahead and draft a wide receiver. So I think trading up to, somewhere between 16 and 19 and drafting Luther Burden, if he falls that far, would be ideal. Of course, if he gets taken, a guy like Tet, what's his name? Tet McMillan, probably not going to be there, but his name is, Emeka Egbuka. Emeka Egbuka. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. You're an amazing football player, and you deserve more respect than that, but I'm trying my best here. So either way, my point is one of them is going to be there, but the best choice is to trade up and try to get one of those guys. So that is my offseason move for the Baltimore Ravens, is to trade up for Luther Burden. You don't need these lower draft picks. You already got starters at every position filled out. That's why I say go for it. Don't rely on a six, maybe you're trading like a third round pick and a sixth round pick to move up in these spots. Those picks are not going to help you beat the Bills. But Luther Burden will, right? A number one wide receiver will. Now, if you can find one later, that's great, but you don't want to bank on it. So like I said, trade up for Luther Burden. That's what the Ravens should do. Moving on To our next team, we have the Cincinnati Bengals, a team that I very much enjoy watching, but they've got issues, especially this year. Now, they're going to be listed as, needing wide receiver since T. Higgins, he's up for contract. They tagged him. Don't know if he's going to sign that or not. That's always fun to deal with. Chase, I believe his contract is up next year, and they're going to have to pay him. He's been begging for an extension since the beginning of this year, and they're going to have to pay these wide receivers. So that's why they're assuming it's a big need. But also, they say tight end. I actually just straight up I just disagree with this. They're pretty deep at tight end. They got Gesicki. They got Eric All, Iowa. Tight end, those guys are always legendary. So give them some time and they'll figure out tight end. I don't believe that's a need. So where is it really a need? Well, offensive line depth. Trent Brown, I believe it is he had a season-ending injury last year, so they did have Amarius Mims step in, but that means you do not any longer have a backup tackle, so you might need to fill that need. Offensive guard, they just released Alex Kappa, so that's going to be a need, and then pretty much every position on defense. So they have quite a bit of needs. They're in a much different situation from the Ravens, not quite the opposite, but you'll understand what I mean in a second. They have no wiggle room financially, the Bengals. For the Ravens, it's like, they kind of know who they have to re-sign. With the Bengals, they're making decisions about this because it didn't work last year, right? So they need to fill holes in the draft and I think bring back Higgins and Hendrickson at the very least. If you can bring back BJ Hill, that's ideal, but I think you'll have an easier time replacing a defensive tackle in this class than you will have replacing the NFL sack leader from last year. So try to bring back Trey Hendrickson and T. Higgins, two really, really good players at their positions. And now you can focus on guard and defense in the NFL draft. So best case scenario for them, in my opinion, is that they actually get to trade back because here's what's going to happen. There's a lot of blue chip defensive players, but they're not going to be there by the time you get to 17. Now, could they move up and try to get a guy like Kenneth Grant here from the Dolphins or the Cowboys who are going to want him? Sure, they could try to do that. Jahad Campbell, what's his face wants a trade out of there. Is it Jermaine Pratt? So they really could go for any position, but here's what I think. These blue chip guys are not going to be there. A lot of the edge rushers are not going to be there. So what I think they should do is right here I have them taking Will Johnson, who would have fallen to them, but I think they should actually trade back. I think the tier of guys in defense you're getting from what pretty much where they are after Jahad Campbell all the way down through, I would say, you go down the list. My point is that they're all sort of in the same tier. They are not blue chip guys, but they are close to it. They have potential. They're there for a reason. I think they should trade back. And wouldn't it be crazy if the Ravens and Bengals just traded because they are in these different situations? But I say trade back and take the best defensive player available. But that's not specific enough, if you ask me. The reason I have them trading back is because if you look at the safeties in this class, many people have, get these wide receivers out of here, Malachi Starks and Xavier Watts as the 1 and 2 PFF. Now, this might not be combine adjusted, but I view Nick Emmanwori as the at least highest upside safety. And the Bengals are going to be drafting a ton of defense in this draft anyway. And Nick Emmanwori might not be like the blue chip, like prospect in terms of like production and everything, but from a talent standpoint, he most certainly is. And when you look at the defensive tackles and the edge rushers, I'm not seeing, comparable elite talent like you have with Nick Emmanwori. Let's go ahead and look at his draft profile. Right here, you can see 6'3", 220. I compared him to Cam Chancellor in my in my top 10 combine players to watch video. I said he was like Cam Chancellor, except faster, maybe a little bit smaller. Appears that's what it is. He was listed as 220 when I did that video. He came in at 220. He was listed at 227 when I did the video. But look, 4.38, 43-inch vertical as a safety. That's amazing. Jumping up, getting interceptions and stuff. An 11.6 broad jump. That's good for the run defense, along with the 20 reps on the bench. I mean, if you can't, and here's the thing with these big, strong safety types, you get your Kyle Hamiltons who end up working out, but then you get your guys like Isaiah Simmons, and no one really knows what to do with them. Should we put them at nickel? Should we put him at safety? Should we use him as a pass rusher? We never really know because he's just a little bit too big to be consistent in coverage. But Wari does not appear to be too big. He ran the 4.38, but he's also got a good 10-yard split. So good acceleration. That's closing distance too. I think this is the difference maker that they're going to need. Like I said, they're going to have plenty of picks if they trade back, especially to fill other needs on defense in this deep class. But you want to make sure that that first pick, if you have an opportunity to get a guy who has all pro level talent, and I'm not kidding, this dude's athleticism is completely insane at a position like safety where you need to be very versatile, match up against tight ends, defend the run well. You saw with the Giants how that can go wrong if your safeties don't tackle well, and the rest of your defense. Let's not get too personal here, but yeah, my point is Nick Emanwari is going to make the pass defense better. He's going to make the run defense better. He's going to make big plays. He could force turnovers, laying the boom, on wide receivers and running backs, forcing fumbles, and maybe with that vertical, he can make some great plays on the ball and some interceptions. He's got long arms. He's 6'3". I think this is a great player, so I think they should trade down the Bengals and draft the best defensive player available. I think it will be Nick Emanwari. So that's the Bengals for you. Let's move on to the Pittsburgh Steelers, a very interesting team because their defense is pretty solid. It's been for years, but you know what that means? They're aging on defense. So there is some supplementing they need to do, mostly depth, but we're going to be talking about big moves here for them. The Steelers need quarterback. They need corner. They're going to need running back, and they really need a wide receiver 2 or 2A, depending on how you view Pickens, offensive tackle as well. So quite a lot of needs on offense, but like I said, they need depth on defense. They're getting pretty old over there. So like I said, this one's tough, but I want to start off by saying I think they should really lock down Fields. I don't think you want a QB mystery with this, position you're in where you actually do kind of have a lot of holes on offense. Justin Fields might not be like what we've hoped him to be so far in his career, but yeah, have to give him credit that he hasn't had very fortunate situations so far. And when he did get the start for the Steelers, they decided to bench him for Russell Wilson, who at first looked like it was the right choice to do so, but then over time, he got banged up and couldn't quite come back 100%. And I think Fields would have sustained that a little bit. He would have endured that definitely much better than Russell Wilson did. So I think they should sign Justin Fields and stick with him. So if we look at the draft board, that leaves the needs being running back, wide receiver, and offensive tackle. Running back is deep. I think they definitely should not target it in the first round, especially where they are. I know I love Omari and Hampton, but Judkins also had a really good combine, and there's other guys down the board. Of course, they could get in the second or third round if they really want to. The Najee pick, how did that work out, right? So I'd say for them, it's wide receiver or offensive tackle. So my approach for them is, I mentioned before for the Ravens how they might need to jump up to draft a wide receiver. The Steelers might be in a good enough spot because even if the wide receivers go here, right, I doubt the Bengals will take one. I doubt the Falcons will take one. The Cowboys could. And, some of your teams near the top might take McMillan. And Luther Burden probably gone by then. But I do think Emeka Egbuka, the guy I mentioned earlier, could be there. And I think he is a great fit for the Steelers. You know how many issues they've had over the years with run blocking, but they will actually have a guy who's willing to run block, and he plays in the slot too. So he reminds me a lot of JSN. They both went to the same school, 6 foot, about 200 pounds, a little bit lankier than this, this other archetype I was showing you. And you might say it really doesn't look all that different to me, but I promise you it is different. These number one alpha wide receivers, they're bigger, they're stronger. They make sharp cuts, but these slot guys, they have really good acceleration, but they don't quite have the top speed that those other guys can get up to, right? So, like I said, he really reminds me of JSN. He didn't quite work out in his first year, but in his second year, he broke out and has shown to be very successful to the point that the Seahawks are even thinking about trading DK Metcalf away. which might open up another wide receiver hole for them there. But what I think the Steelers should do is they should stay put. They should stay put and take the best offensive lineman or the best wide receiver available to them at that spot. Ideally, that would be Emeka Egbuka, but if it's offensive line, then you take offensive line. You still have to protect Justin Fields. It's still something you're going to have to address later in the draft. And I just like the way he fits into this offense because you have Pickens, who's like an outside guy who can run some routes, but overall, he's really just boxing dudes out or he's jumping over their heads to make catches on the perimeter. Calvin Austin, another perimeter wide receiver, but he's just a speeder. He's a deep threat, not a speeder. Uh, so he's really fast, but kind of small. Can't really out physical guys. So you have a nice complement of outside wide receivers between him and Pickens, but neither of them can really be relied on as like I'm not going to say true number one, but sort of a safety blanket, someone who you can consistently, get a bunch of receptions to and move the chains. And that's exactly what slot receivers like Egbuka and JSN have done. So I think this is a great fit for their team. It also sort of mitigates a bit of the offensive line issues if you have someone who can quickly get open. Your quarterback should be aware of that and be ready to dump it off to him if he sees a blitz or, his offensive line failing to hold up in protection. So I think it's a great fit. If it doesn't turn out to be him and they have to go offensive line, that's okay too. There's a lot of wide receivers who could sort of fill this role for them deeper in the class, but Egbuka is just the best one. So that's what I think the Steelers should do. Sign Justin Fields, bring him back. Draft defense later in the draft and target with your first round pick Emeka Egbuka or go offensive line. Now, moving on to our last team. This team is in a much different situation. We've talked about the draft for all these teams, and we are going to talk about it again. But if you know anything about the Browns, you know they're in a horrible situation. They're like $30 million under the cap. Deshaun Watson is getting paid to exist on their team, and he's recovering from a torn Achilles. Myles Garrett wants to get traded, so edge actually should remain as a need for them because I do think that will happen. Quarterback is going to be a need. Watson's done. Jameis, he's probably gone, and DTR is not the answer. Their offensive line has been decimated by injuries. Wide receiver, running back. I mean, Jerry Judy's there, a wide receiver. Chubb is probably a goner at running back. So they just need like everything. They just need to restart. So what do I think they should do? First of all, trade away Myles Garrett and get as much as you can for him. Get as many picks as you possibly can for them. And also, don't stop there. You have a lot of dudes on this team who are aging veterans who still have value now. Denzel Ward, David Njoku, and there's tons of other guys. And if you're worried about, we need these guys, it hasn't been working. You have the number 2 overall pick. I get you had quarterback injuries, but none of your quarterbacks were good this year. So don't tell me that you need these guys right now because by the time your team has finally been built up, they're going to be 30 plus years old and they're not going to be in their prime. So trade away as many of these guys, these older guys as you possibly can, and acquire as much draft capital as you can. You're $30 million under the cap. You're going to have to cut people. You need as many rookie contracts as you can get. And so where does this leave us? They have 2 options now. So depending on who they trade this pick to, they're either going to get probably the Lions, maybe the Commanders. That's where I projected them to go. But there's a couple other teams in there. But I don't think it's going to be a team that's not close to a Super Bowl. So probably no one, who wasn't a divisional round loser or worst, or at least a wild card team. So that's where they're going to get at least another first round pick this year. So what they can do is they can either just straight up use all these picks, maybe even continue to trade down or trade into next year, acquire more picks for next year, just lock in and brace yourself for the rebuild. Or if you're not quite as patient, you could try something else. And it's not something brand new. It's something that has been done before. It was actually done pretty recently by the Houston Texans. They were in a situation where they had, I believe it was the number 2 pick. Bryce Young went number 1 overall, and they selected C.J. Stroud. Probably not going to get a quarterback first overall in this draft. I don't think it could still happen, but not what I think is going to happen. And where I'm going with this is they could use a lot of these picks that they acquired to trade up with the New York Giants, who I believe would be willing to move down, especially if they know that they've taken Ward already. And they're saying, well, we don't really need Abdul Carter. Or maybe we like Travis Hunter, but we have a ton of needs and we could use the draft picks. Browns trade up to that third pick, and you could take Abdul Carter. Ideally, him, if not Travis Hunter, after trading away Denzel Ward. And either way, you're going to be able to replace one of the elite guys that you traded away. They're going to be on a rookie deal. And most likely, they're going to be close to, if not an all pro. And that's just about the best you can do. And look at how it worked out for the Texans. That they were definitely more competitive than the Browns were the season before, but they had Davis Mills. They weren't dealing with DTR. And I think just adding like a, premier edge rusher or a premier corner and getting your quarterback might not be a terrible idea. I mean, if you roll into this season with a bunch of brand new draft picks, but you don't have a quarterback, that's really not that great either. And I understand I'm going to have different philosophies for the Giants and stuff, but if you take Cam Ward, though, and just him, and you don't trade Garrett or any of these other guys, it's not going to pan out well for you. You're going to get a very similar result. The offensive line still needs so much help, and I think they got to make these trades happen so that they can fill out this whole roster with a bunch of young talent and get a fresh start. So that's going to be all for this one. I guess I spoke a little bit more than I did about the NFC East, which is surprising. But hey, you guys are getting the content, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Please leave a comment telling me your thoughts. What do you think each of these 4 teams should do? Leave a like on the video to support the channel. Subscribe so that you don't miss the other 6 videos that are going to be coming out. Like I said, so far I've covered the NFC East. Now we've covered the AFC North. Up next, you'll have to wait and see to find out. So I hope I see you guys in that next one. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you all later. Peace out.